Hey guys, welcome to your lesson on 7.1 and 7.2, which is topics and theories and motivation. And this is the first lesson in our unit on motivation, emotion, and personality. So what is motivation? A need or desire that energizes and directs behavior. What do you think? Should we get started on that motivation research or not? How is motivation pushed or pulled from us? Our motivations arise from the interplay between nature, the bodily push, and nurture, the pulls from our personal experiences, thoughts, and cultures. Our motivation drives our behavior. So this is a read loop, but I want to bring back intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivations, performing an action or behavior because you enjoy the activity itself, and extrinsic motivation is behavior that is driven by external rewards such as money, fame, grades, and praise. This type of motivation arises from outside the individual as opposed to intrinsic motivation, which originates inside of the individual. The overjustification effect is when an extrinsic reward is introduced after a behavior that a person is already intrinsically motivated to perform, which then decreases the intrinsic motivation. So if I gave you, so at camp, you're intrinsically motivated to get your food cooked, right? Because you know that you guys need to eat and you know you need to work together. So you just do it. You perform the behavior because you enjoy the activity and because you need to eat. But if I started giving you rewards for that, then you would be less likely to do that behavior or to do that thing on your own. Self-efficacy refers to an individual's belief in his or her capacity to execute behaviors that are necessary to produce specific performance attainments. That was Bandura. That's the key person that we're going to connect with self-efficacy. Self-efficacy relates confidence in the ability to exert control over one's motivation, behavior, and social environment. So from which perspectives have psychologists viewed motivation? We're going to talk about instinct theory, drive reduction theory, arousal theory, and hierarchy of needs. So what's an instinct? An instinct is a complex behavior that is rigidly patterned throughout a species and is unlearned. The key is unlearned. What are examples of instincts? So imprinting in birds, the return of salmon to their birthplace, infants' innate reflexes to root for a nipple and suck, which is its way of eating. What is instinct theory? So to qualify as an instinct, a complex behavior must have a fixed pattern throughout a species and be unlearned. Instinct theory views our instincts as a source of our motivations. Instinct theory states that the motivation to survive is the most important motivation, and the innate behaviors that aid survival drive our motivations. This sounds quite a lot like evolutionary theory. How do physiological needs create a drive? Physiological needs, such as for food or water, create an aroused, motivated state, a drive, such as hunger or thirst, that pushes us to behave in a way that reduces the need and returns the body to homeostasis. Homeostasis is the tendency to maintain a balanced or constant internal state, the regulation of any aspect of body chemistry, such as blood glucose around a particular level, temperature. All right, what is drive reduction theory? The idea that a physiological need creates an aroused state, a drive that motivates an organism to satisfy the need and restore the body to homeostasis or balance. How does drive reduction theory explain how we regulate our body temperature? Our body regulates its temperature in a way similar to a room's thermostat. Both systems operate through feedback loops. Sensors feed room temperature to a controlled device. If the room's temperature cools, the controlled device switches on the furnace. Likewise, if our body's temperature cools, our blood vessels constrict to conserve warmth, and we feel driven to put on more clothes or seek a warmer environment. How is behavior pulled by incentives? So not only are we pushed by our need to reduce physiological drives, but we're also pulled by incentives, which are positive or negative environmental stimuli that lure us in or repel us. Can one behavior be both pushed and pulled? When there's both a biological need and an incentive, we feel strongly driven. The food-deprived person who smells pizza baking may feel a strong hunger drive, and the baking pizza may become a compelling incentive. Remember, it wasn't module 29, but it was one of our last units. Incentives can be extrinsic, coming from the external environment, or intrinsic, coming from within oneself. And I reviewed that in the beginning of this lesson. Can curiosity be a motive? Curiosity drives monkeys to monkey around trying to figure out how to unlock a latch that opens nothing. Curiosity drives newly mobile infants to investigate every accessible corner of the house, and it drove students in one experiment to click on pens to see whether they did or didn't deliver an electric shock. How do humans seek optimal levels of arousal? Having all our biological needs satisfied, we feel driven to experience stimulation. Lacking stimulation, we feel bored and look for a way to increase arousal. However, given too much stimulation or stress, we look for a way to decrease arousal. How do humans seek optimal levels of arousal? Having all of our biological needs satisfied, we feel driven to experience stimulation. Lacking stimulation, we feel bored and look for a way to increase arousal. However, given too much stimulation or stress, we look for a way to decrease arousal. What is the Yerkes-Dodson law? Two early 20th century psychologists studied the relationship of arousal to performance and identified the Yerkes-Dodson law. Moderate arousal leads to optimal performance. So you look at this diagram, and you've got, on the left side, you've got performance level, high performance, low performance level, and you have arousal from low to high. So you can see with easy tasks, the arousal is towards the high side and the performance level is towards the high side. But with difficult tasks, you've got arousal towards the lower side and performance level towards the higher side. And right in the middle where the red and the blue line cross, that's the moderate arousal leading to optimal performance. So what is optimal arousal? Between bored, low arousal, and anxious, hyperarousal lies a flourishing life. Having all of our biological needs satisfied, we feel driven to experience stimulation. Again, lacking stimulation, we feel bored and look for a way to increase arousal. So between bored, low arousal, and anxious, there's hyperarousal. Between the being bored and low and being hyper, right in the middle, that's optimal. That's when a flourishing life happens. And it's where that red and the blue line met. Abraham Maslow's theory of motivation. It should not say Abraham's Maslow's. It should just say Abraham Maslow's. Abraham Maslow theorized that human needs are hierarchical. Some have priority over others. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this triangle. It begins at the base, at the bottom, with physiological needs. So things like satisfying hunger and thirst. And it goes all the way up. Safety needs, belongingness and love, esteem needs, self-actualization, the need to live up to our fullest and unique potential, and self-transcendence needs, the need to find meaning and identity beyond the self. What is self-transcendence? So near the end of his life, Maslow proposed that some people also reach a level of self-transcendence. At the self-transcendence level, people strive for meaning, purpose, and communion in a way that is transpersonal beyond the self. Maslow's contemporary psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, a Nazi concentration camp survivor, concurred that the search for meaning is an important human motive. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. Is the order of Maslow's hierarchy fixed? The order of it is not universally fixed. People have starved themselves, for example, to make a political statement. Culture also influences our priorities. Self-esteem matters most in individualist nations, whose citizens tend to focus more on personal achievements than on family and community identity. Consider this research on hunger. Ancel Keys and his research team, 1950, studied semi-starvation among wartime volunteers who participated in a challenging experiment as an alternative to military service. After feeding 200 men normally for 3 months, researchers have the food intake for 36 of them. The semi-starved men became listless and apathetic as their bodies conserved energy. Eventually, their low body weight stabilized about 25% below their starting weights. The men became food obsessed. They talked food, they daydreamed food, they collected recipes, read cookbooks, and feasted their eyes on delectable forbidden foods. Preoccupied with their unfulfilled basic need, they lost interest in sex and social activities. What physiological factors produce hunger? We're going to talk about these 5. How is hunger related to stomach contractions? So working with Walter Cannon, A.L. Washburn swallowed a balloon attached to a recording device. When inflated to fill his stomach, the balloon transmitted his stomach contractions. Washburn pressed a key each time he had a feeling of hunger and felt a hunger pain. Pang, not pain, pang. What were the results? Whenever Washburn felt hungry, he was indeed having stomach contractions. Can hunger exist without stomach contractions? To test this question, researchers removed some rat stomachs, creating a direct path to their small intestines. The rats continued to eat. Some hunger similarly persists in humans whose ulcerated or cancerous stomachs have been removed. If the pangs of an empty stomach aren't the only source of hunger, well, then what else matters? Well, we're going to move through and figure it out. What is glucose? So glucose is the form of sugar that circulates in the blood and provides the major source of energy for body tissues. If your blood glucose levels drop, you won't consciously feel the lower blood sugar, but your brain, which is automatically monitoring your blood chemistry and your body's internal state, will trigger hunger. Appetite hormones released from your hypothalamus, stomach, intestines, pancreas, and liver all signal your brain to motivate eating or not to motivate eating. What role does the hypothalamus play in hunger? The hypothalamus, which is the orange-colored part of that diagram, performs various body maintenance functions, including control of hunger. Blood vessels supply the hypothalamus, enabling it to respond to our current blood chemistry, as well as to incoming neural information about the body's state. How does the arcuate nucleus impact hunger? This is a small structure in the base of the hypothalamus. The arcuate nucleus plays a key role in the regulation of appetite and body weight. Portions of the hypothalamus that control appetite are the lateral hypothalamus, the LH, and the ventromedial hypothalamus, the VMH. The LH is a stimulation of this structure in the hypothalamus stimulates hunger. So lesioning, which is surgically removing it, inhibits hunger signals. The stimulation of the VMH of that stimulation of that structure inhibits hunger. So one stimulates, one inhibits. So lesioning inhibits satiety, full signals, which means you feel full. Where lesioning, the first one, the LH, that inhibits hunger signals, which means you are always hungry feeling. So research has been conducted. When the neural center, which secretes appetite-suppressing hormones, is electrically stimulated, animals will stop eating. Destroy this area and animals can't stop eating and will become obese. So going back to this diagram, what are the 5 appetite hormones? Insulin, leptin, and PYY all decrease appetite, while ghrelin and orexin increase appetite. And a way to remember those is with ghrelin starts with a G and orexin starts with an O. Go, meaning like go, eat. I ready, start, eat. So those increase and the other 3 decrease. All right, what is a set point? So the point weight at which your weight thermostat may be set or fixed. When your body falls below this weight, increased hunger and a lowered metabolic rate may combine to restore lost weight. What oppositions are there to the idea of set point? Well, some researchers doubt that our bodies have a preset tendency to maintain optimum weight. They point out that slow, sustained changes in body weight can alter one's set point, and that psychological factors also sometimes drive our feelings of hunger. Think critically about set point. Given unlimited access to a wide variety of tasty foods, people and other animals tend to overeat and gain weight. For these reasons, some researchers prefer the term settling point to indicate the level at which a person's weight settles in response to caloric intake and expenditure. What is basal metabolic rate? This is when our bodies regulate weight through the control of food intake, energy output, and basal metabolic rate, and the rest, which is the resting rate of energy expenditure for maintaining basic body functions. So basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy, or it's the rate that your resting body needs in order to maintain basic body functions. So how is basal metabolic rate impacted in Key's semi-starvation experiment? By the end of their 6 months of semi-starvation, the men who participated in Key's experiment had stabilized at 3/4 of their normal weight, although they were taking in half of their previous calories. How did they achieve this dieter's nightmare? They reduced their energy expenditure partly through inactivity, but partly because of a 29% drop in their basal metabolic rate. There's more to hunger than meets the stomach. Researchers tested 2 patients with amnesia who had no memory for events occurring more than a minute ago. If 20 minutes after eating a normal lunch, the patients were offered another, both readily consumed it, and usually a third meal offered 20 minutes after the second was finished. This suggests that part of knowing when to eat is our memory of our last meal. Is there a relationship between geography and food spices? Countries with hot climates in which food historically spoiled more quickly features recipes with more bacteria inhibiting spices. The hotter the climate, the more spices were used. How do situations control our eating behavior? Some situations arouse our appetite more than others. In one experiment, watching an intense action movie rather than a non-arousing interview doubled snacking. Eat more when we're around others? Yeah, most of us do. After a party, you may realize you've overeaten. This happens because the presence of others tends to amplify our natural behavior tendencies. Does serving size matter? Researchers studied the effects of portion size by offering people varieties of free snacks. For example, in an apartment building's lobby, they laid out either full of or half pretzels, big or little Tootsie Rolls, or a small or large serving scoop by bowl of M&Ms. What were the results? The result was consistent. Offered a supersized portion, people put away more calories. They ate more. What does the research on serving size show? Offered pasta, people eat more when given a bigger plate. Children also eat more when using adult-sized rather than child-sized dishware. And even nutrition experts helped themselves to 31% more ice cream when given a big bowl rather than a small one. Have cooking shows influenced healthy eating? Today, dozens of cooking shows are broadcast to millions of US viewers daily. Yet fewer Americans than ever are home cooking their own more beautiful meals. Beautiful and healthful meals. Does food variety stimulate eating? Yep. Offered a dessert buffet, people are going to eat more than they do when choosing a portion from one favorite dessert. For our early ancestors, variety was healthy. When foods were abundant and varied, eating more provided a wide range of vitamins and minerals and produced protective fat for winter cold or famine. What physical health risks are associated with obesity? So diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, gallstones, arthritis, and certain types of cancer. Obesity is also associated with increased depression, especially among women, bullying, outranking race and sexual orientation as the biggest reason for youth bullying in Western cultures, which is ridiculous. It needs to stop. What do the statistics show? Obesity rates are worldwide are higher than ever. What is body mass index, which is your BMI? Your BMI is a measurement of your body fat based on your weight in relation to your height. Why was storing fat adaptive? Well, this ideal form of stored energy carried our ancestors through periods of famine. Evolutionary perspective. People in impoverished places still find heavier bodies attractive as plumpness signals affluence and status. How do set point and metabolism contribute to obesity? Fat, lower metabolic rate than muscle, requires less food intake to maintain than it did to gain. If weight drops below a set point or settling point, the brain triggers hunger and metabolism. Body perceives starvation. It adapts by burning fewer calories. Most dieters in the long run regain what they lose on weight loss programs for that reason. How does sleep loss make us more vulnerable to obesity? Sleep deprivation increases the release of ghrelin, which stimulates the appetite, and decreases the release of leptin, which reports body fat to the brain. So, if we're eating more and not alerting the brain to fat accumulation, we are going to gain weight. All right, last part of the lesson on topics and motivation is sex. Is sex a need? Sex is not like hunger because it's not an actual need, yet sex still motivates. A small number of humans are asexual and have no sexual attraction to others. How do sex hormones influence human development? Well, during the prenatal period, sex hormones direct our development as males or females. During puberty, a sex hormone surge ushers us into adolescence, and after puberty, and well into the late adult years, sex hormones facilitate sexual behavior. AP exam tip, the main thing to remember here is that there are many biological processes that govern human behavior less rigidly than they govern the behaviors of other species. Because of our highly developed brain, sex hormones have less control over our behavior than they do over other animals' behavior. What are the biopsychosocial influences on sexuality? So, biological, sexual maturity, sex hormones, especially testosterone. Psychological, exposure to stimulating conditions and sexual fantasies. And social cultural, family and society values, religious and personal values, cultural expectations, and media. They all three contribute to sexual motivation. How important are psychological factors? Compared with our motivation for eating, our sexual motivation is less influenced by biological factors. Psychological and social cultural factors play a bigger role. That is important to remember. Sexual motivation is more influenced by psychological and social cultural factors than they are by biological. All right, what does affiliation need? This is the need to build relationships and to feel part of a group, the need to belong. Social bonds boosted our early ancestors' chances of survival. Again, evolutionary perspective. Adults who formed attachments were more likely to survive, to reproduce, and to co-nurture their offspring to maturity. Attachment bonds motivated caregivers to keep children close, calming them and protecting them from threats. Can belonging boost health? Having a social identity, feeling part of a group, boosts people's health and well-being. How has being online changed us? Nature has designed us for face-to-face relationships, and those who spend hours online are less likely to know and draw help from their real-world neighbors. Does electronic communication stimulate healthy self-disclosure? When communicating electronically rather than face-to-face, we often are less communicated on others' reactions. We are less self-conscious and thus less inhibited. Sometimes this is taken to an extreme, as when bullies hound a victim, hate groups post messages promoting bigotry or crimes, or teens send photos of themselves they later regret. More often, however, the increased self-disclosure serves to deepen friendships. What is achievement motivation? Last part of the lesson. A desire for significant accomplishment, for mastery of skills or ideas, for control, and for attaining a high standard. So there's a study. Researchers followed the lives of 1,528 California children whose intelligence scores were in the top 1%. 40 years later, when researchers compared those who were most and least successful professionally, they found a motivational difference. Those most successful were more ambitious, energetic, and persistent. As children, they had more active hobbies. As adults, they participated in more groups and sports.